I wanted to give you one final video here outlining some important skills and different areas you could focus on moving forward. And I think these are things that our advisory board, they've mentioned these in the past, and they're going to be important, I think, especially if you want to stand out from everybody else, because the field, whether you're talking about graphic design or web design or video, it's more competitive than it used to be, so you always want to look for ways to stand out. So these are some of the different areas that you can focus on, and they maybe would help you to become a little more well-rounded in your skill set. So starting at the beginning here, this is kind of what we've been focusing on in this class, beginning front-end web development with HTML and CSS, getting into Photoshop or other graphics programs, focusing on designing web graphics, obviously, like a program like Sketch. Then getting into WordPress, and WordPress is a course, or we have a course on WordPress. It's IMD 180, so you could take that one, or you can learn that on your own, or use a site like lynda.com and learn it. I'll show you some websites here to go with this in just a second. Of course, creating site mockups. So all of this falls in like the front end development. WordPress can get pretty heavy on the CSS and the code and everything, but you can also stick with the front end development for WordPress. And then part of being a good front-end web developer is, and when I say front-end web developer, I'm talking about the way it looks, really creating the look of the page, the user interface, the user experience, the graphics, the basic like the HTML and the CSS, but not so much the programming. That's an entirely different job. Now, there are some people who can do both of those things, but generally you either have the designers or you have the programmers. But as far as being a front-end developer, understanding how the programming languages work, I think is important, not necessarily being a programmer. And that's where a site like W3 Schools can kind of help you get started on that, because they've got all the different programming languages here, like PHP and ASP and JavaScript, things like that. So if you understand how those work and maybe how those connect to the front end, that would set you apart, but you don't necessarily have to be a programmer and the designer. Now, usually if you have the front-end web development skills, you are also a graphic designer. So just being a graphic designer, by yourself, if you're really good, that you're probably going to be okay. But generally, people who are graphic designers can do other things as well. So if somebody says, well, can you give me a mock-up for a web design? Graphic designer can usually do that, or even basic video editing. So if you're talking about a graphic design, you're talking about Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign, obviously. Typically designing for print, but a lot of the skills do overlap when you're designing for digital media as well. Video editing is really important these days. That's something that our advisory board mentions over and over again, but the programs that are probably the easiest to learn and the most accessible would be Adobe Premiere and then Adobe After Effects for the special effects. And then some other, you might call these like soft skills, but writing and email etiquette, and resume, creating an effective resume and cover letter. These are all things that are really important to employers. Also being able to communicate effectively, talk to someone and explain what you're doing with your work. That's kind of where the case studies come in. The members in our advisory board, they consistently mention that they look for candidates that have these case studies ready. And you may learn some of those in like the IMD 280 portfolio class if you're in the graphic design track. But that would be, creating or outlining your entire process with words and graphics for your projects. So really talking it through from start to finish, and not just showing someone one example of, what you've done, but really showing them how you arrived at that final piece in your portfolio. So these would be, this is not just something I'm coming up with. This is advice from people working in the industry. That's really, where we get our information from. So these are my recommendations as well for you if you want to focus on something, creating more of a well-rounded skill set that can help you stand out. And again, I can't stress how important like writing is. How many poor cover letters and resumes and even emails, something as simple as writing an email where you have a subject and you have a greeting and a closing and you have complete sentences, and you're not just typing it out on your phone. That's really important as you move forward and you start communicating with people in the industry. So that's the skills that I am that I wanted to point out here, and then a couple websites. Moving forward from this class, whether or not you're going to be taking courses in our program or just going out and learning more on your own, don't forget lynda.com. Don't go to lynda.com. Go to the public library site and then access that. The Creative Cloud, the student price is reasonable to get access to all of these different apps, so everything I mentioned is included in that price. At some point you may have to invest in that if this is going to be your career. W3 Schools will always be there for you, like a textbook, all different programming languages, so it's a good resource. WordPress, we haven't talked much about that. Obviously, that's not what this class is about, but go to wordpress.org, not wordpress.com. The .org is the open source that you can download and play around with, and you can get this to work on your computer without a hosting company, but if you want this to be live on the web, you do have to have your domain name and hosting. So you could use a site like HostGator. There are a lot of different ways to share your work. Now, one thing you want to consider is your own domain name and your own website at some point, because that looks good. It just looks good if you're going to be able to give your site out, and then you can customize your site, design it the way you want it. And you would have to have something like this if you are going to get into WordPress and do that at all. And then that's it. So that's just a few things that I wanted to show you. Just a little bit of advice moving forward, but again, this is just a really quick summary. So if you have any other questions about what courses to take, or what skills to focus on, or if you ever want me to just review your portfolio or your resume or anything like that, just send me an email and I'll be glad to do that for you. Also, I can be a reference for you if needed, if you are in the position where you are going to be trying to get a job or freelance work or something like that. Alright, well that's it for this video.